I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
Well, there are already so many big men fighting this war. Maybe what we need now is a little guy. Huh?
In The Winter Soldier, there's a real subtle transition that I think conveys the essence of Captain America's struggles quite poignantly, which is after the argument with Nick Fury about freedom, fear, and security in respect to their wildly different views of the world.
This isn't freedom. This is fear.
Captain America leaves and has a stroll in the Smithsonian Museum where he escapes in a moment of reflection from the people he's lost and also to escape back to a world he's familiar with. Nostalgia is the longingness for an imagined past, and it particularly thrives unavoidably in times of change. Captain America is all about diagnosing this modern mood, as in the age of modernity, constant social change has become normal. Because technology is always developing so quickly that sometimes it's hard to have a sense of stability. I know I feel alienated sometimes with these damn kids and their fucking TikTok and their fucking McBang streamings and whatnot. The world is constantly being reorganized as a result of new technologies, which is awesome since it increases the standard and quality of life, but it also creates a tension between traditional structures and the agency of the individual. As Max Weber once said, the fate of our times is characterized by rationalization and intellectualization, and above all, by the disenchantment of the world. And the through line of the Captain America trilogy is showing that disenchantment.
Sorry, Ned. I can't sign it.
About a man persevering through change and refusing to let go of his personal values, even if it no longer corresponds to his environment.
Thanks. I think.
Somebody get that kid a sandwich.
And I'm wearing tights. Fondue?
Write that down. Hydra's not going to attack you with a pocket knife.
Well, if it isn't the Star-Spangled Man with a plan.
Cal.
I'm failing!
In the opening minutes of the first Avenger, Red Skull destroys a town in search for the Tesseract, a piece of technology that can give him power. And then we see a scrawny kid whose sincere love for the traditions of heroism and patriotism responds to this world at war.
Come on, there are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them.
Symbolically, this establishes the two forces, tradition versus modernity, as modernity as a form of social change is marked by a level of irreverence towards traditional structures because its values are arguably incompatible. Modernity is orientated towards the future and with constant development, while tradition is all about adhering to the past. In fact, the original Latin etymology for the word is tradire, which is defined by giving something to someone for safekeeping. In other words, traditions act as a vanguard for a stable society. And that's what Captain America represents. What happened to my voice? Jesus. And that's what Captain America represents. He is a protector. Even though he's a product of forward-thinking science, the story de-emphasizes that aspect of the character's strength and instead focuses more on the notion that he's naturally good-hearted.
Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing. That you will stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier. A good man.
What makes him special is hereditary rather than augmented. So when Captain America and Red Skull goes to war, it's a battle of values, a response to a world that's becoming more inhuman and dehumanizing.
I'm not sure they have the strength.
Then use up what strength they have left, Doctor. There are always more workers.
Red Skull believes in working his prisoners to death in the name of productivity, and he rejects his association to the Nazis because nationalism is irrelevant to his idea, his vision, in fact, of technological sovereignty. While Steve contrastly creates a community of volunteers out of those prisoners that rally behind the ideals of the flag. But in the end, Steve goes into hibernation while Red Skull disappears. That tension between these two is ultimately eased because the world itself is transitioning. The end of classic modernity and into the world of postmodernity.
Man, shut the hell up. Want to see my lease? Thanks.
Hey, Sailor. Bye-bye bikinis.
Yeah, I bet you look terrible in them now.
Postmodernity is marked by a sense of blurring, where all distinctions are broken down because everything is subject to being deconstructed by an overall sense of skepticism.
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. Guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
It's a belief that there's no such thing as right or wrong, only competing points of views. Therefore, it's a sociological and philosophical movement that is somewhat infamous for declaring the end of the grand narratives like religion, politics, and nationalism, etc. Which, ironically enough, that declaration would actually make postmodernism a grand narrative in itself, but whatever. The point is, this sense of discontinuity and loss of traditional firm and dependable ways of viewing the world becomes the core drama to Steve's journey in The Winter Soldier. He's someone shaped by tradition, forced to live in the modern. He's a man out of time, but finds reassurance by continually serving and protecting his country. But in the age of mass surveillance and all-powerful helicarriers, the relevance of traditional patriotism is deconstructed by Steve's own sense of skepticism towards modern American society. Why stand behind the flag if it's completely disinterested in its own traditions and identity? And so the blurring between tradition and modernity begins to complicate everything.
For once, we're way ahead of the curve.
By holding a gun to everyone on Earth and calling it protection.
Instead of old values colliding with technology, it's now old values made monolithic by technology. And this is encapsulated by the reveal that S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra were one and the same the whole time, and also by what the algorithm represents.
The 21st century is a digital book. Your bank records, medical histories, voting patterns, emails, phone calls, your damn SAT scores. Zola's algorithm evaluates people's past to predict their future.
Society shapes the direction of technology, and technology also shapes society. It's a symbiotic tension in a way, and for better or worse, during this epoch, it's created a new political culture of intense fragmentation. If anyone is interested for any further analysis of how online algorithms has affected the way politics is organized, there's a fascinating book called #Republic, Divided Democracy in the Age of Social Media by Cass Sunstein. But suffice to say, algorithms have spearheaded the modern social change, because it often decides what we're socialized into in modern life. From what we watch on YouTube, what news we see on Facebook, what social circles we're in on LinkedIn, who to date on Tinder, what to buy on eBay and Amazon, and on a political level, one of the biggest consequences is creating a new polarizing culture.
The Strike and Insight crew are Hydra as well. I don't know how many more. I know they're in the building.
A landscape where it's just sort of normal to hang out only in ideological insulated communities where you're only with like-minded people, which on one hand is nice because it bolsters a level of collective solidarity and it makes organizing activism a lot easier, but it's also created a dangerously new sensitive and antagonistic culture towards people that hold different politics. So the Hydra and the helicarriers plan to eradicate anyone who has or can develop differing opinions based on an algorithm that can determine someone's unconscious ideological profile is very much an exacerbated version of this fear.
I can bring order to the lives of 7 billion people by sacrificing 20 million.
An anxiety of where the development of algorithm culture can manifest itself in a world where traditions of the flag doesn't divide people, but the private beliefs of the ordinary individual living in modernity does. But Captain America isn't going to let this new world powered by oppressive obedience win.
S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra. It all goes.
One of the key foundational pillars of Steve's very being is his need to protect the rights of others, even if it means being exposed to a world of risks, because his whole story started with him volunteering. If he wasn't allowed to choose, there would be no Captain America. So he destroys S.H.I.E.L.D., he destroys the very division he helped build, and loses his connection to his country because he's developed in one direction and America has developed towards another. In his mind, this marks the end of a grand narrative.
Can you move your seat up? No. Just like that, we're supposed to be cool?
Viz, we talked about this.
What's so awesome about Civil War as a soft bookend to Captain America's journey is that finally he's faced with a representative of modernity that isn't a villain, it's just another person with different values. Oppositional, but is also as equally valid. Tony fucking Stark.
Communes.
Sorry.
Because the previous Captain America movies had been about his response to the biggest social changes in the world, but now it's about the man who experienced all of those changes, where Steve's adherence to formerly public traditional values becomes ultimately just private cogs in his identity. The disenchantment finally kicks in. In Captain America 1, Erskine points at Steve's heart before he dies to remind him that who he is naturally is more important than the power that science gave him, while conversely in Iron Man 1, Yinsen gives Tony a new heart. Science fixes what wasn't naturally already there inside him. So one character is all about perseverance and another is all about reinvention, and therefore they implicitly hold vastly different views on social change.
I'm trying to keep you from tearing the Avengers apart. You did that when you signed.
And these two perspectives collide on one subject: individual rights in the age of globalization. In a time where the relevance of old nation states are decreasing, how much expected responsibility should the individual have in relations to the larger connected world? Steve's personal values with traditional community, freedom, and so forth doesn't change, but his opinion of the institutions around him does. While Tony's personal values towards private responsibility over governmental intervention completely shifts from Iron Man 2 to Civil War, because whereas Steve is shaped by a fixed sense of hopeful nostalgia of the past, Tony is all about constant preparation towards his fearful connection with the future. And so they collide. But what's interesting about Civil War is that, unlike First Avenger or Winter Soldier, it's not about Steve's relationship with the world, because the Sokovian Accords aren't even mentioned after the halfway point. It's all about his relationship with himself. Peggy dies, so the only connection he has left with his sense of emotional continuity is Bucky, who's just getting bloody punched in the face by everyone.
He's my friend.
So although we see him further diverge away from the direction of the world around him, his self-concept is forced to finally abandon his public identity because the people in the world and the country it holds no longer reflect who he is privately. The world has changed into such a complicated state that it can't facilitate someone who just wants to stand up to bullies and help his friend. And that's kind of the tragedy of the character. Until Endgame happens, Steve doesn't compromise, he perseveres, even if it's goddamn painful.
I'm not looking for forgiveness, and I'm way past asking permission.
But on the bright side, even though each Captain America installment explores Steve's progressively declining relationship with the modern world, each Avengers story shows flashes of his relevance to it. He finds his footing in times of war and conflict. Even when World War II ended, the war never left Steve because that's all he has left.
I'm home.
So looking back on Endgame, Steve leaving it all behind, finally compromising for once, gives his whole journey, I think, a real sense of poignancy. The first Avengers showed a simple world of simple morality, then the Winter Soldier showed the relevance of simple morality in a complicated world, and finally Civil War showed the fallibility of that simple morality in an uninviting world that can no longer or even wants to facilitate it. Navigating through change is disorientating, but refusing to lose that grip that holds your very convictions in a world that calls it irrelevant is even more dizzying. But holding your feet in shifting sands isn't just about stability. It's about where you connect your next steps. America is a pretty young country, and I think the Captain America trilogy as pieces of cultural artifacts does a fascinating job in providing a vivid exploration towards the current social epoch. And because it's part of this grand, interconnected cosmology where other characters can exist with radically different opinions and attitudes about the same developing world, I think this makes Steve's journey feel all the more sincere. And with the use of flying men, laser guns, and super soldiers, the simple sincerity of each exploration, each adventure, each loss and victory composes a mosaic of sorts. Good evening all, so this has been my remake of my old Captain America video that for no reason blew up. The reason I remade this is because that video is pretty fucking terrible, I have to say. The goddamn microphone was pointed in the wrong direction. I had like a lisp because I was so nervous that my tongue freaking froze, so I sounded like I got a penis in my mouth the whole time. And I think I was like 19 when I made it, so I went in with a really bad attitude. Not to mention, it was like my first proper video essay, so I just sounded like one moment I'm talking about nationalism, and another moment I'm talking about bloody modernity and security theory and blah, 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 surveillance. So yeah, you know, I hope this video has been an improvement. It's probably not, but you know, I've also got a Patreon now.